This Chayula build focuses heavily around combos and a more hit and run playstyle, utilizing your mana leech and life leech to always sustain over long periods of time, ensuring consistent ad clears as well as easier experiences against bosses well into the end game. So whether you are new to Path of Exile 2 or you are more experienced in the game, this build caters to everybody, as you will see in the next section. So if that all sounds good to you, stay tuned for much more. Alright, so in this section we're going to cover our skill gems and support gems, why I've chosen them, and just give you a deeper glimpse into my brain as to how I build craft along the way. Now, disclaimer, there are going to be some things that you may not perhaps like about the build, or maybe you favor other abilities, and by all means you can swap that out for yourself, but just know that this build as is has carried me to endgame, and so it's really up to you. That being said, into the breach we're rocking with clarity, magnetism, cannibalism, as well as herbalism. These all in tandem are just to ensure survivability and just sustainability with regards to our abilities. Mana regen, remnants being able to collect it from much further away. This is really good because without it, it just makes the build feel a little bit more clunky since you have to always run around and collect your remnants, but this ensures that they are collected from much further away. They absorb into you, which is nice. And then cannibalism, life on kill, recovery is nice, and life recovery from flasks is always good. Frozen Locust is wonderful. This is perhaps my favorite ability in the entire build itself, and that's because it combos into itself. It freezes very fast, which we'll see here. So you get by default a 50% more freeze buildup. Add that in with glaciation, that gives you 50% more freeze buildup. So you essentially have 100% freeze buildup, which then builds into deep freeze because it makes the freeze last longer. And then Frost Nexus giving you that chill ground to ensure that ads just don't move and you can just wipe things very easily. Next we have Mantra of Destruction. I've gone with Murderous Intent and Meditation. Murderous Intent is just there as the additional supplement, just because I do have another culling ability in this build, but this just ensures that if one isn't ready over the other, this just makes sure that I have culling ready and activated. And then Premeditation just empowers the damage to do more damage. Staggering Palm is great because it works in tandem with what's coming soon, which is Vaulting Impact, but we're rocking with Soul Thief for more leeching, Impact Shockwave, as well as Cold Infusion. Now without Cold Infusion, we drop significantly here to 1295, so it is nice to have since we are building more into freeze anyway, so having more cold damage is nice. And then Falling Thunder, we have Heft, Landing Infusion, and Coursing Current. Very similar to Staggering Palm here with regards to DPS. I've added Theft here because you are converting 60% of your physical damage to lightning damage. Heft gives you, or increases rather, the maximum physical damage. So right now we're at 2948. And if you look on the right hand side, your physical damage here isn't the, not the highest, but without Heft, we drop down to 786 max. But with it, we have 1021. So it is good because it gives us additional DPS increase, and then you have Landing Infusion as well as Coursing Current to spread that shock even further. Next up is Vaulting Impact, which I love, and then this gives us Fist of War, Momentum, and Overpower. Now Fist of War is great because it gives you that 30% boost for the Ancestral boost, and you tie that in with Momentum, and that's a nice 70% additional damage you can do just off of one attack in the air. And then you can build up the stun more quickly, which plays really well into Staggering Palm because you just get free stuns every time. And then when enemies are frozen, it's also easy for you to deal with things like Falling Thunder and then Staggering Palm into more damage. So Overpower, you get 50% more stun buildup alongside the default of 76 stun buildup, and so you now are getting over 100% stun buildup with this ability. Arrow Device plays well into everything as well, since the more you freeze, you get those explosions, which is always good. Vitality, you get more life regen. Embitter just gives us more cold. And then Thorn Skin, this is just additional supplement. This isn't a mandatory thing, which goes back to my disclaimer. Thorn Skin is just, for my items, there is a thorn damage buff that I have, or modifier. So I've just thrown it in there for additional damage. So this can be swapped in for something like, let's say, a Lacerate, if you really wanted to. to just get some bleeding in there. But again, it really makes the difference in terms of what you want. And then Ice Strike really plays well into everything else. Herald of Ice, Vaulting Impact, Falling Thunder. Ice Strike is great. We have Primal Armament, Martial Tempo, and Crescendo. Armament just gives us more elemental damage. Tempo, more attack speed, which means more DPS. And then Crescendo, as you attack, that final strike of the Ice Strike, just, again, it's more powerful, adds more utility, and makes it so that our combo game is much more fluid. And then Lightning Warp. Lightning Warp is fantastic. This, honestly, at first, I was kind of questioning it, but the more I used it, and you've seen it in the opening intro, it's really, really powerful when maximized and utilized correctly, especially when you really consider the amount of freeze we're doing. Frozen Locust and Staggering Palm and Herald of Ice. With enemies being frozen and stunned, Lightning Warp just gives us everything. So we have Life Drain, Soul Drain, and Despoiler. Life Drain gives us a chance to recover life when we call. Soul Drain, when we call, we get more mana. And then, of course, Despoiler, that makes that shocked ground that we create from Lightning Warp much longer, therefore more damaged long term. Lingering Illusion is also fantastic, and this I've used so much. It's really good because every time you're dodging, you are basically getting a free power charge. And with Perfusion alongside Persistence, the duration lasts longer. And also, this gives you additional charge when needed, which then plays really well into our Falling Thunder, because this is what consumes your power charge to create more of that AoE damage. So this, in tandem with everything, once again creates a more fluid and more consistent ad clearing and just boss damage dealing build. And then lastly, we have Frost Bomb, which again plays really heavily into things like Ice Strike as well as our Herald of Ice. Frost Bomb, we have Spell Echo, which means it repeats twice, and then Magnified Effect, making that AoE larger, therefore hitting more enemies. And then we have Elemental Focus, which essentially does more elemental damage, so it's always a positive. So that being said, let's move on into the next section. So just to briefly summarize with the Ascendancy, once you do complete the Trials of Zakema the first time, you want to opt for Into the Breach, or rather Waking Dream first, as that's what's going to give you your Chayulas. And then once you go into the end game, you want to build heavily into your leeching, and then lastly end with Consuming Questions, because this is where your Mana Leech really comes into play. It recovers your energy shield, and if you wanted to go really, really deep, you can also opt for Mana Over Matter, which takes all damage from your mana before your life, as well as Eldritch Battery, where it converts all your energy shield into mana, but at the cost of double mana. But if you have a good mana pool, it's really going to not matter as much, because you're just going to constantly be doing damage and you're freezing targets, which makes it easier to sustain over time. So what you're looking for on the skill tree is, of course, Mana Leeching. So if there's anything on the board that you see that is Mana Leech, you want to grab them as quickly as possible. This one, most notably, Manifold Method, is great because it gives you a massive 50% increase of Mana Leech, and this is currently what I'm building towards. It also gives you a 25% increased chance to inflict ailments, which is also fantastic, since we're working with things like Shock and Freeze, which is always nice. And then you can see that I have a lot of Intelligence, and that's just because I've built heavily, once again, into my mana pool. I want to make sure that because I'm doing so many combos, so many abilities are being used in tandem, having a much higher mana pool alongside Mana Leeching just makes it so that you're consistent, you're fluid, and the build doesn't have to worry about you draining yourself dry. And then we have things like attack damage, which is great. We have energy shield to focus on. We also have things like spell damage, because we do have spells in our build as well. And physical damage, because that converts into, as we mentioned earlier, lightning damage and cold damage. And then we have also chaos damage as a bonus, since we are rocking with the Mantra of Destruction. So that can also give you the additional supplement of damage along the way. And then you want to build into things like crit damage, just more DPS is always nice. And along the way, if you do find it, look for things like shock damage, inflict, more freeze buildup, stun buildup if need be. And if you can make it far, try and go over to your quarterstaff section. Having this all filled up to where the end game is always going to be nice since we're rocking with the quarterstaff. This is just going to ensure that your attack speed's higher, which means more DPS, alongside more damage, crit damage, and dexterity along the way. So all in all, those are the nodes you want to be focusing on. Everything else is really just icing on the cake, but just to keep things short and sweet. Elemental damage, magnitude of shock, and chill. These are things to look out for. If you can grab them, great. If not, not a big loss since everything does work already as is, but it is just additional bonus if you want to focus on that. So that being said, let's move on to the last section. The item section is going to be quite a subjective one since not everybody's going to have what I have, but I'll give you the main suspects to look out for. Most notably, you're looking for some movement speed, you're looking for energy shield, maximum mana, some resistance is always great. So whether it's chaos, fire, lightning, a little bit of everything is nice because it just helps to, round out your build a little bit more. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of my resistances as I was building. I used to have roughly, 40 here on my fire, 50 on my lightning, but as time passed and progressed and as I engaged more in the end game, I had to do a little bit of swapping. But basically build into your resistances. It just helps you long term. It helps you to survive much longer. And because we're rocking with freeze, you want to have some utility in that area. So for me, I've opted for the Ice Tomb Mailed Vestments. This gives me a whopping 22 intelligence, which builds into my mana, and then a nice big chunky 34% for resistance to cold. And the intelligence is great because it builds into your mana. And this states that freeze as though dealing cold damage equal to 10% of your max mana when hit. So this is great because we currently have 1023 mana. And so that's going to really help us with regards to this freeze ability or modifier. Now I've corrupted most of my items, as you can see. And some of those have been really good, others have been quite random, but in this case, for the mailed vestments, it did give me the increased mana regen rate, as well as the increased armor and energy shield, which was fantastic. And then for runes, you can opt for things like more mana regen, and strength is nice. It just depends because strength can play into some of the abilities, so having strength is nice, but most importantly, intelligence and dexterity is always good. As far as your weapon is concerned, you really look for physical damage, as that's going to really help to convert into your lightning and cold damage respectively. I was lucky to get a nice good chunky roll, 101 physical damage here just by modifier alone, and then I added the additional 25% on top of that, so we have a nice 126% physical damage, all of which is converted into more DPS. And of course, as I mentioned, getting more leech is going to be your best friend, as that's what we're playing into. Anything with mana leeching, if you can get it on any of your equipment, it's always nice. So for example, on your rings, leeching mana, that's always good. If you can get it on, let's say, your wraps or your gauntlets, it's always nice. Your boots is always nice. Look for more resistances, look for more max mana. Movement speed's great. Of course, having more energy shield is fantastic. And for the belt, make sure that you have, to some extent, having 2 charm slots. 3 is always great, but most importantly, making sure you have some charges per second. And the reason why I opt for charges per second is because it just adds more comfort to the build. As you're playing the game, and if you take damage, and let's say your flask is halfway, as long as you're engaging in some sort of battle and your mind's not thinking about your flask too much, this will charge over time, which is always great, which means that you can just play with a little bit more, again, comfort in your mind, knowing that you'll always have your flask available. Now, considering that we have a lot of mana to deal with, this particular flask that I have, the removal of mana from life isn't really that important since we're constantly ensuring a mana is there. Like, I really don't use my mana flask as much as my life flask. In fact, I would say that this is seldom used just because we have so much mana leeching that we don't worry too much. But it is good to have nevertheless. Now, as far as your charms are concerned, this is all flexible. You can opt for resistances as I have. some stun and some bleeding, but this all depends on the content you're really up against. But long story short, try to go for items that have some degree of utility pertaining to freeze, resistances, cold damage, lightning damage. In this case, I opted for Arian's Cobble Guarded Helm because it gives me just about everything, and this was really what helped to really just round my build out a little bit more. It just added a nice stat bonus across all avenues, and it really ensured that my strength and my dex, my intelligence, everything in general was just a lot more well-rounded and balanced, which is great. So in the end, this build really does, as I mentioned before, play around ice, play around freeze, stuns, and shock damage. And all those together in tandem really ensure that you long-term are always surviving and doing more damage, alongside giving you some freedom to move around, play that more hit and run play style, and then leeching mana and life along the way for your own survivability. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Look forward to more build guides like this in the future for Path of Exile 2. If you enjoy what you're seeing here, once again, follow me live on twitch.tv/newfrontier_. Watch me live, ask me questions there. And as always, new warriors, stay strong, keep fighting, and may the force be with you all, always. See you on the next one. Take care. Peace.